Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Enterprise Management Mobility. Don't be the channel, own the customer. A joint WebEx presented by Rockshaw and Ovum. If everyone on the call could please make sure that your audio line is on mute. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session. If you could just add any questions via the chat box on the WebEx, and we'll pick those up at the end of the session and answer some of the questions. So feel free to submit questions at any point through the session, but via the chat box on the WebEx, please. Also, a copy of the slides will be sent to everyone attending the WebEx following the event. So you will have a full set of the slides presented. So as I say, welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name's Mike Slynn. I'm the Managing Director of Rockshaw. Rockshaw's a privately held software and product development company based in the UK, and we focus on working with global telcos and global carrier operators and helping them address the enterprise market with aggregated platforms for managed mobility solutions. Also with me today I've got Richard Absalom from Ovum.
Hi Mike, hi everyone, thanks for having me here. So I'm Richard Absalom. I'm an analyst on the Consumer Impact Technology team here at Ovum. Ovum is a leading global IT and telecoms research and analysis house. We've got about 150 analysts worldwide covering a broad set of technologies and markets. We're based out of the offices here in the UK. Within the consumerization practice in particular, we have around about 2 years experience of focusing specifically on all the issues around things like bring your own device and enterprise mobility, and it's obviously an area that we will be looking to continue covering in some depth over the years to come.
Thanks, Richard. Today's agenda is we're going to focus on bring your own device and bring your own application, and in particular some of the latest insights from the multi-market BYOD survey conducted by Ovum. We'll then look at how this impact of bring your own device is a disruptive influence on the enterprise market in particular, and how this is both an opportunity and potentially a threat to the carrier's long-term position within the enterprise market. And then finally we'll look at some of the strategic choices that are before the carrier today, how it's quite time dependent in terms of making a clear choice as to how carriers wish to position themselves in this market. And then finally we'll move to a question and answer session following any of the questions that you submit through the session. If I could just remind everyone, if you could go on to mute on the audio line, please, that would be helpful. So the first section is looking at some of the data that has been put together by Ovum from their multi-market BYOD survey. So I'll hand over to Richard to take us through some of the interesting findings.
Thanks, Mike. Just to clarify some of this data and just mention where we got it from, why we've done it to start with, that'll help you to understand some of the data that we'll be showing over the next 10 minutes or so. So this is the second year running that we've run this survey. We've gone out to 4,000 plus consumers across 18 different countries. 19 this year, we added China compared to last year. And essentially, we wanted to find out what people were doing with personal devices and also corporate provided devices at work. So we targeted consumers because this is a consumer-driven trend. The only criteria that we had for people to enter this were that they had to be full-time employees in businesses or organizations with over 50 employees. So looking at this data, always please remember this is a view of the full-time employee, the professional population of any particular market. It's not necessarily a view of the whole population of any particular country. But what we found in 2013, compared with the 2012 data, is actually a remarkable level of consistency. So if we define people bringing their own device to work as using a smartphone or tablet, a personal smartphone or tablet to access corporate data, in 2012 the overall number that we came up with was 57.1% of employees doing this, and in 2013 it was 56.8%, which, you know, with a difference of 0.3% is hardly anything. In fact, you could almost put that number down to just sampling differences. And when we look at the split between markets, again, this remains really consistent. As we saw with the data from last year, there's a much higher uptake of bring your own device amongst consumers in what you might call emerging or fast growth markets, such as the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, but also South Africa, the UAE and Malaysia, compared to in Europe and some of the Western developed markets, where we see in general a lower uptake of BYOD. So while all the hype, and we know there's a lot of hype around this, has come out of Western Europe in particular, and we know most of the vendors involved in the space are Western based, the activity is actually really global, and you know, we see differences in terms of cultural uptake and behaviours in emerging markets, but it's definitely happening there amongst employees more so than in the West. And when we look at the splits between industries, again, we find there really isn't that much difference or between 2012 and 2013, or even actually in terms of the different industries. This is a really cross-vertical trend. People are likely to bring their own device no matter which industry they work in. So if you look at some of the comparative data here between 2012 and 2013, we can see there's quite large jumps perhaps in verticals like like entertainment, and we think that's possibly a sampling error given a fairly small sample of people based in that vertical. But also, you know, overall the trend is for continuity. We do see that there are some perhaps later adopting verticals that have seen quite a large uptake in 2013, such as leisure and hospitality. While others, if you look at, say, legal services, was really quite an early adopting vertical when it came to bring your own device. We now see that dropping a bit, and that's potentially a reaction by legal services companies to go and actually provide the devices that they think their employees want. Again, if we look at company size, in terms of the uptake of bring your own device by company size, the story again is one of continuity year on year. The major drop, if any, that we see is in very large companies of over 10,000 employees, and again we think this is the case of some of these companies being at the forefront of thinking around a mobility strategy and having something in place where they're able to go and provide their employees with the devices that they want rather than allowing a BYOD scheme. So in terms of the sheer numbers involved, what we found was really interesting with tablets was just the growth of the tablet base. So amongst our respondent base of full-time employees, the growth in tablets of 2012 and 2013 was 1.7%, so almost 2%, two times growth in terms of the numbers of tablets that people are bringing to the office. Now, when you consider that the rate of BYOT, as in bring your own tablet, has changed very, very little, again, between 2012 and 2013. So in 2012 there was around about 74% of tablet owners bringing those to the office, and that's down to about 70% in 2013. But given the sheer growth and the numbers of tablets, that means there are of course a lot more tablets now entering the workplace. In contrast to that, incidentally, we see a much smaller growth in corporate provided tablets. So we know there are fewer people or fewer companies actually going out and providing tablets. That growth was about, it rose from 12% to about 17.5% in 2013. We also asked, what does BYOD mean to the IT department, or how are people's IT departments reacting? And again, you have to remember this is an employee survey, and they might not always necessarily have a view, or they won't know exactly what IT knows, but this is what they think IT knows. And as we can see from this, a worrying stat is that when it comes to smartphones, around 50% of this activity is going unmanaged, or even unencouraged, or directly against what IT is asking or putting out there as a policy. And the same for Bring Your Own Tablet. About 45% of Bring Your Own Tablet activity is going unmanaged. We also asked a different question around how people are having devices provisioned by their company, and found that actually 67.8% of smartphone-owning employees who are bringing that smartphone to work, and of that 67%, 15% are doing it with no knowledge by their IT department, and 21% are doing it directly against company policy. So there's a feeling here that even if you don't want it to happen as an IT department, as an enterprise, BYOD is happening. People are doing this against company policy. And in terms of application usage, we're seeing increasing usage of this new generation of cloud productivity applications. So in particular, file sync and share, enterprise social networking, and instant messaging and VoIP. When we asked kind of how long people are spending on these applications, we saw an increase in usage between 2012 and 2013. That's against core enterprise apps like BI and Analytics and CRM. That's kind of flat growth between the 2 years, but there was growth in these new third-party apps, the cloud productivity apps. The other thing that we're seeing, and if you have Bring Your Own Device, of course, what's the next stage? What do we expect to see? Is Bring Your Own Application. And this is a worrying thing for the IT department as well as the carrier, which I'll come to separately. But in terms of file sync and share in particular, we found that 22% of employees are actually finding their own and using their own file sync and share apps, such as Dropbox. Then almost half of those people who are actually using enterprise social networks have found it themselves, and a similar number of those people using instant messaging and VoIP, so that's often Skype, have gone and sourced their own application. Now, from the carrier's point of view, what does this mean? Well, what we're seeing here is effectively an over-the-top threat from the software vendors. We're seeing a lot of these carriers, a lot of these vendors like Microsoft, Google, Apple, effectively turning carriers into the dumb pipe and just delivering the services across the web. So carriers need to understand this and develop their relationship with the end user, try and provide them with the services they require rather than letting the competition get ahead. So it's about getting a seat at the table and having the ability to provide managed services around these applications and really owning the customer rather than just being the conduit to their services. And this slide 10 here, really just kind of highlights that more in terms of the actual applications that we see people using. You can see there the red part of the column is those people finding this application themselves, and we found that it's really Google, Microsoft, and Apple, and the niche player like Dropbox dominating this market. So these are cloud-based applications that are posing that threat for the carriers. And the interesting finding in terms of behavioural difference here is that this isn't just about people wanting to collaborate with colleagues. This is about people wanting to share documents and files between their different devices. So they want to have access to their work from whichever device they're working on, wherever they are. So this is starting a whole trend to what we're calling enterprise multi-screening, and that's again filtering in from the consumer sphere, where we see people using any different screen they can to watch TV or films, for instance. That's now filtering into the enterprise. So, what does this mean? What does this sum up? Or how do we sum this all up? We can see really that consumerization has effectively a disruptive impact on every organization out there. As we've seen, it's cross-vertical. We also know it's cross-job role. It's international. It doesn't matter what size the company is. People will bring their own devices into work. It's a consumer choice. It's not driven by what their job is. So while that has a disruptive impact on IT organizations, it's really a big opportunity for any solution providers in this space. And that opportunity comes from the fact that, you know, ignoring BYOD isn't an option for businesses, and that's primarily because of the security risk involved. So in terms of that data security risk, when you think there are three primary points where threats are present, around the application, the network, and the device or the endpoint, BYOD and consumerization means that there are more types of application, more networks being used, and more types of devices in use. So we're effectively multiplying the threats to security of corporate data. The issue for carriers is that at the moment, enterprises are going to a variety of different software vendors to find the solutions to this, and effectively that's weakening the carrier position. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Mike to talk about how he at Rocksure sees how these changes are affecting the carrier position in the market.
Thanks for that, Richard. Before I come on to the effect on the enterprise market, I'd just like to take a step back and really remind ourselves what happened in the consumer market over the last 10 to 15 years. If we go back to the late 1990s and the turn of the century, the market was really dominated by the carriers or the network operators, and consumers would choose between those operators. This was very much driven by connectivity and coverage being the differentiator, and people living in certain areas would argue about which of the network and carriers were the best in their locale. And building on top of this, the operators would launch interesting promotions and services which would try and build a loyal user base in a certain segment of the market. Examples are things like Orange Wednesdays and Vodafone Live and other elements like that. And then the seismic change came in 2007 with the release of the iPhone, and that shifted the point from which the consumer made their decision from which network was the network they wished to be part of to which device they would like. It coincided with the device network rollout being very, very complete across most developed countries, and therefore little to distinguish between the carriers in terms of coverage. And consumers very rapidly changed to being focused on the device that they wanted, and the network provider was simply a route to connect that device at lowest possible cost. More recently, that's even moved to operating systems being the environment around which consumers make their decision, whether they're an iOS person or an Android person. Particularly feeding back into the theme of multi-screening, people who become iOS users across their smartphone, their tablet, and their home TV operations, and other people who stick with the Android operating system. So the consumer market has been through that evolution, and it's very well documented. The enterprise market, however, has remained somewhat a bastion of carrier and operator control. Historically, very much dominated by the BlackBerry from a device point of view, and the relationship being much stronger with the individual carrier. Single contracts in place with IT departments or communication departments that made the buying decisions for their entire organisation. The main driver being to enable mobile working, and again connectivity being the factor. The next step in the enterprise market is, as more and more data is transited across mobile devices, is the need for security and control applications to really secure that data on behalf of the enterprise. And this is where similar threats begin to come into the carrier's position from the enterprise, within the enterprise market. New entrants into the application sphere for security, control, and expense management are all beginning to contract directly with enterprises and change the relationship that carriers have with their enterprise customers. And we see today that we've moved into an area where complete enterprise mobility is required, and that cuts across devices owned by the enterprise as historically have been in place, and both devices and applications that are brought into the enterprise from outside. So a comprehensive solution to enterprise mobility is needed. And there's 4 key pillars to this enterprise mobility. The core and the bedrock is connectivity, and that's where carriers derive their strength from. Clearly a requirement before any of the other elements are delivered. But above that, user management is crucial. It's the gateway into services. And then we group everything else into 2 broad areas of expense management and security and control. And under each of those areas, there is a proliferation of different applications which try and solve niche issues in each of those broad areas. So this fragmentation of different organizations selling into the enterprise leads to a situation where many enterprises say that there is no one-stop shop for their requirements today. There's several players coming from different angles converging on this enterprise mobility play. And so I'm going to hand back to Richard at this point to take us through Otham's thoughts about the positioning of different vendors in the different elements of the enterprise market.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I'd say there isn't at the moment any real single vendor that we see who can currently provide what we would call that complete enterprise mobility management solution, and that takes into account things. Someone who is able to provide mobile device management, application management, expense management, network access control. And at the moment, what we see really is quite a fragmented landscape. So if you look here in terms of those who have, those who have really good capabilities versus those with strong brand strength and channel ownership, there are some really clever things being done by the enterprise mobility management specialists out there. So you think along the lines of AirWatch and Good Technology, Mobile Iron, Citrix, who acquired Zenprise, and Fiberlink. There's some really good solutions out there over on, say, the far right hand scale, but they're still relatively niche. They're going through a lot of growth, but they don't have the kind of brand and channel pull as, say, the big ITSM and enterprise application vendors like SAP, HP, IBM who are entering this market. You also have a lot of guys entering the market on the security side. So Symantec and McAfee, for example, are making big plays in here, and also vendors on the network access control side, that providing the layer of security at the network. So ones that spring to mind are the likes of Forescout, Alcatel-Lucent. Then you have even more of a niche, perhaps those involved specifically around telecoms expense management. So the best example is probably Tango, who are based in the US. And you also have guys like Zygo, who are acquired by Dimension Data. And we also know that the device manufacturers themselves, such as BlackBerry, have moved into this. And we also know Microsoft is moving in this way. So you've got a bunch of different players here, but none of them are necessarily at the moment providing that total mobility management solution. Now, the one player missing from this chart at the moment, obviously, is the telecom vendor or the telecom operator. So where do they fit? Well, at the moment, we kind of see them really in the top left-hand side of the graph there. So the carriers have really good relationships with enterprises on the whole. They have obviously great brand strength and pull, but at the moment, not necessarily particularly good mobility management capabilities of their own. The primary channel has been to go and resell, white label, to certain solutions from specific vendors. But they have the opportunity there to really move into that sweet spot on the top right hand of having the brand and also having all the mobility management capabilities around content and applications and device control and network control. If they take steps now to actually go out there and try and own the customer and improve that offering. So overall, I mean, how we see the overall strategic threat really for carriers around BYOD at the moment is that, as businesses respond to BYOD, they get a greater share of devices being distributed into the enterprise via consumer channels, which obviously has a pretty bad potential knock-on effect on the overall number of net connections that the carriers are able to provide. If they're losing a whole bunch of enterprise connections because of BYOD, that's obviously a large bit of revenue going for carriers. So we think that carriers have to effectively respond to the new requirements of these enterprise customers and go out and develop a value-added services offering that can help to replace those connections that are being lost to BYOD. And we see at the moment those on the top rung, the real tier one carriers, kind of responding and developing that integrated and comprehensive mobility management solutions portfolio. Although, to be honest, the ones that are doing that we see as a bit of an exception. The rule at the moment is, like I mentioned, the basic channel partnerships and having a range of solutions to offer breadth of functionality. The other thing to notice here really is that this market is on a timer. So we've talked about some of the software vendors in the space, and they're really in land grab mode at the moment. So I talk a lot with vendors like AirWatch and Mobiline and Good, and some of these guys are seeing just incredible growth in numbers of customers year on year, and even month on month. So they're throwing marketing money at this. They're just calling in as many customers as possible, really growing their market share, but also mind share. For enterprises, when they think of where to go to solve their mobility problem, at the moment they don't think of carriers. They go to the software vendors that are putting their names out there. And these guys who may have started in the mobile device management space, they're all gradually increasing their offerings to move out, especially towards mobile application management and containerization. And they're looking to keep ahead of the fact that MDM itself is commoditizing because of the great competition in the space. So what the problem for carriers is, if they're being slow to compete, and if this doesn't change, they risk missing both the near-term revenue opportunity in this rapidly growing market, but also in the long term, there's the potential to miss out on the opportunity of being that trusted platform and delivery partner to actually go out and manage the enterprise mobility application portfolio. So, I mean, to back that up, we ran a conference a couple of weeks ago called the BYOX World Forum here in London, and we had 2 days just focusing on talking around all the issues around how to manage mobility in this consumerized environment, and talking to multiple different enterprise delegates there. What we got back from them was they were basically, very few of them were likely to go and find or to go to a telco, go to the carrier to find a solution to this problem. Most of them think that carriers are either part of the problem or not providing any answers. So there's obviously there is an opportunity here for carriers, but there's obviously some difficulties that I think we need to get over first. And I'm going to go back to Mike to talk about how he thinks carriers can best do that.
Thanks, Richard. And Rockshore actually did our own survey towards the end of last year, and we got quite a shocking number, shocking from the carrier's point of view, in terms of the number of our enterprise respondents who said they would seek advice from their mobile operator or carrier before implementing BYOD, and also how many of them would speak to their carrier as a first port of call when they're looking to implement managed mobility solutions and applications. So the danger is that the carrier isn't often at the table and isn't often hearing the problems that enterprises are facing. Therefore, there might be a level of complacency about the need for value-added services in the areas of security and control in particular. Another interesting figure from that survey was that 51% of the enterprise respondents identified lack of integration as a major challenge when trying to implement multiple managed mobility solutions. So it really looks like there is an opportunity for a fully integrated solution which would cover all of the key areas. And the question really is who will provide that? Whether it will be some of the device management vendors who will strike deals across sectors or expand their own base in terms of functionality, whether it will be some of the bigger players like the handset vendors or the Microsofts and Googles of this world who will move down from identity management into the functional areas, or whether the carriers and operators will move from their area of strength of connectivity into integrated functionality. So it's a market in flux, and there's definite opportunities to be had. That said, there's several different strategies that a carrier can implement. As I said at the beginning, Rocksure works with global carriers to assist them in the space of managed mobility, and we see a range of different strategic approaches from carriers. And I'll take you through the four types of approach that we see most regularly. The first approach we call the enabler. And this is the carrier that has made the decision that value-added services are either too complicated or don't deliver enough revenue for them to dedicate effort to. They therefore focus on what they see as their core business. That's providing connectivity only and delivering the connectivity for any of the outside applications to deal directly with the enterprise's mobility issues. This is a perfectly good position to be in, but it really becomes a price-driven position. And there's normally one vendor in each geography or each country that specialises in this segment of the market. The other approach that we see is to outsource the entire area of value-added services. So there's examples of several carriers, several in the Asia-Pacific region do this, but there are examples in Europe and North America as well, where the delivery of all corporate value-added services is outsourced to a third party. Again, there's benefits to this area. It allows the carriers to rapidly provide a broad portfolio, but the complete touch point and control with the enterprise is handed over to a third party who then go on to build capability and functionality themselves. So the next option, and this is probably where I believe most carriers are today, certainly in Western Europe and North America, and that's in a reseller type model. This is where the carrier will respond to enterprise requirements by going into the marketplace and buying point solutions. Often this is a good approach because it enables best of breed solutions to be brought in each of the application areas. But there can be a tendency to be responding to every customer need and ending up with a huge list of applications and vendors providing that functionality. But the carrier leverages their position with the customer and resells other people's software directly, taking a margin on that resell. So again, it enables them to have a broad portfolio very rapidly, but the margins that they take across that product set is limited by the fact that most of the vendors they work with will also be competing with them directly for direct sales into the enterprise. And so the final approach, and as Richard mentioned, this approach today is predominantly being taken by the major tier 1 multinational carrier vendors, however is being discussed much more by the tier 2 carriers as we speak, and that's to provide a full service. It's to own the customer interface. It's to provide a mix of applications which are best of breed applications from the marketplace, but integrate them into a single consolidated platform. to have user management at the top level and controlled by the carrier, and again to provide that single portal through which the customer accesses all applications delivered by the carrier and all functionality, and often separating the functionality from the back-end application, meaning that the customer sees it as functionality delivered by the carrier, and break that hard link between the customer and the vendor solutions. So we believe that there is a very good reason to decide that you want to remain in the enabler position. It allows a very tight focus on the core of what carriers look to deliver. It's a low risk position. It requires very low investment because there's no value added service portfolio. And it's about really driving efficiency across your operations and competing on price. And there's examples in pretty much every geography of one carrier in this position who is the lowest cost provider in that market. At the other end, fully owning the customer is, I believe, where the tier one carriers and anyone who wants to be seen as a market leader needs to be. This allows them to own the customer interface and learn from customers' requirements to continually evolve those offerings and really take ownership of the full enterprise managed mobility stack. The two positions in the middle, the outsourcer and the reseller positions, we believe are often the default position that carriers find themselves in if they haven't made a clear strategic choice. The reseller position in particular tends to build gradually over time as carriers choose more and more applications to meet point solutions. They by default find themselves in the reseller position. And the outsourcer position is often something that is done initially to get someone into the market and potentially they may regret later as all capability gets built ever more into the outsourced organisation rather than into the carrier themselves. So we fear for carriers who are in the outsource and the reseller positions. We believe that they should look to move either into the enabler position only or move up into the ownership position of the full marketplace. And in order to do that, abstracted platforms are required in order to deliver a single consolidated solution. So, in summary, BYOD, bring your own device, bring your own application, and over-the-top services are definitely here to stay. The figures out of Ovum surveys show only a growing trend for professionals to bring their devices into work and use corporate data across them. And they pose very much a threat to the strong position carriers have historically had in the enterprise sales market. There's definitely a moment to choose the carrier's position in this marketplace, and I've outlined some of the choices that are to be made in terms of how carriers can address this market. And there's very clear opportunity for carriers. As Richard explained, the carrier sits at a position of real strength in terms of the connectivity base and the relationship with customers, particularly with large global customers and large multinationals. The challenge is for them to move into that leadership position in terms of consolidated functionality as well as the position with the customer relationship. And if they can achieve that, they may well find that they don't get pushed into the position of being purely a bit pipe, which is what has happened more and more in the consumer market. And ultimately, we believe that consolidated managed mobility services are what's needed, but there is a challenge to this. If you choose a single vendor in order to have a consolidated service, you tend to be compromising, as there is no vendor in the market today that is best of breed across all of the vertical requirements that have been outlined. Whereas if you choose best of breed point solutions, there is the challenge of lack of integration. So an abstracted model where you get the best of both worlds best of breed solutions in each point area, but brought together by the carrier, potentially the only player in the marketplace that could bring all of those solutions together into a single aggregated platform, looks like the approach best laid out for a carrier to capture this marketplace. And so with that, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined today's webinar. We'll take a few minutes break here and we'll look at any of the questions that have come in, and then we'll be back with you to answer some of those questions. If anyone's got any other questions they'd like to submit through the Q&A function on the webinar, please do so, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Hello everybody, so we're just reminded, if anyone else wants to submit questions, please do so through the function on the WebEx. And I'm going to start with a question about cost. It's funny how everyone goes straight to the price. The question is, integration sounds expensive. Is reselling the model not a lower risk approach? Is there enough value to be gained? It's a very good question, and it's really the challenge that we get when speaking to many carriers who are in that reseller model. It does feel like a lower cost approach on the surface. Normally it's really just a commercial deal that needs to be done with vendors, and that allows a carrier to get functionality out into the marketplace. But as we showed from some of the survey results, lack of integration very quickly becomes a challenge pushed back to the carrier from their customers. So by starting down the reseller route that looks like maybe a cheaper option to start with, what tends to happen is that integration is forced upon the carrier, and integration is required between point solutions. Now, as point solutions, as more than one point solution are integrated together, a few things happen that can leave the carrier in a very bad position. One is that they're pushing vendors of license fee software to become systems integrators. So they begin to push their device management partner or their telecoms expense management partner to integrate with each other. And certainly when they end up with multiple device management vendors and they're asking them to integrate with each other, the vendors don't want to do this, they're not set up to do it, and it becomes very difficult for the carriers to force through that kind of integration that's required. And then ultimately, and it has been work that Rockshaw's been involved in, people move to the aggregated platform model once they've already spent a lot of money in cross-platform integrations that they look to unwind.
I think I'd also, I'd add to that as well. I'd say, every enterprise is different. So when you think about putting a mobility solution together, there's going to be very different requirements, and people are coming from different backgrounds. They might already have different solutions in place. But yeah, it fits in. The vendors don't particularly want to integrate with each other. They might say they do or they can, but they all have very different point solutions. I think what's key in terms of having that integrated experience, an integrated view, is being able to provide whatever it is that particular enterprise wants, no matter what part of the journey, say, they are on their enterprise mobility strategy. Whether they're at the very beginning and they just want a pretty simple mobile device management solution, or if they've been through that phase, they're looking at a bit more sophisticated ways of managing mobility through, say, containerization, or just application level management rather than device level management. Being able to actually seamlessly switch between these different types of solutions is quite important.
Just had a follow-up question on that one actually, that says, how many applications justify the investment in aggregation? Again, it's back to that point I made. Often carriers realize that an aggregated platform is required almost when it's too late, when they've already spent significant funds on doing cross-platform integrations. So I would argue that as soon as you have two applications in either security and control or expense management areas, that's the point where you need to be thinking about putting the right infrastructure in place. And the savings will come from the need to only integrate with billing systems and provisioning systems once, and then whenever you're bringing additional applications into the portfolio, they can be integrated into the abstraction layer without the need to repeat those same integrations over and over. So cost savings come from putting the correct application architecture in place early. What tends to happen more often is that the pain of cross integration needs to be felt first before people can tend to justify the business case. So what should happen is a little bit different to what typically does happen. Okay, the next question we have here is, does BYOD need a separate management tool? And I guess that means separate to something like an ordinary device management application. Richard, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in any business, we actually see very few enterprises going for, say, an all-out BYOD approach, as in just allowing people or just making it obligatory to bring your own device. You know, for most people, this is a tool, or it's a choice as well. I mean, we see a lot of difference within organisations, and remember, it's a consumer-driven trend, so this differs from person to person. You know, some people don't want to have that capability. Don't want to bring their own device. They don't want to blur that line between personal life and work. They want to have the tools provided to them by their enterprise or by their employer. So, in terms of having, you know, needing a separate management tool for BYOD, I don't think that makes sense for businesses in the long term, or even in the short term. What you need to have is a tool that is able to manage mobility across any device, whether it's corporate or personal owned. And provide as much flexibility around that as possible.
It's quite an interesting point, actually, because I think it depends on timing. Initially, the BYOD phenomenon opened up an opportunity for new vendors into the space. And we did see new vendors like Enterprise Divide and OpenPeak, and even people like VMware moving into the BYOD area and really challenging other device management solutions who didn't have the containerization and BYOD capability. So those enterprises and also those carriers who wanted to move quickly and provide something in this space as an early adopter, then I think, yes, a separate management tool was and probably still is needed. However, the major players in device management are moving quite rapidly to fill that gap. So if either an enterprise or a carrier is prepared to wait, then the expectation is that the device management vendors will plug the gap and will also have strong BYOD capabilities. But it's a very good example of how a change in the market opens up an opportunity for new vendors and further complicates the landscape which the carriers have to deal with to provide full coverage and best of breed solutions. And it's also a very good example of when an abstracted approach has been used well, because the BYOD, as Richard mentioned, is very rare to be 100% coverage. So enterprises always have a mixed fleet, and if point solutions are being used, then within a single organization they may need to use a device management vendor and a BYOD vendor to secure and control all of their devices. So at which point there is very strong push to have an integrated portal through which they can manage all of their devices rather than two separate offerings.
Yeah, I mean, I'd back that up. I'd say we see a lot of pushback, or you're starting to see pushback amongst employees within businesses against things like device management. If you've got a tool or essentially a client on a device that can go and monitor the activity on that whole device, so it can't easily separate between work and personal data, that's not going to be that's going to upset a growing number of employees. And like Mike said, the device management players recognise that. MDM itself is becoming a commoditized product, where all these guys are aiming to make that extra bit of cash is upselling people to things around containerization and mobile application management. And I'd agree with the point. This is really opening up a lot of opportunities for different vendors. I spoke with one just last week who are doing entirely browser-based security. So, completely separating work and personal data and offering an online portal on any device. So this is the kind of thing that carriers, I think, are having to contend with. But also, it shows the range of different services that are out there that you can go and integrate with.
Great. Just with an eye on time, I think that will be the last of the questions that we'll take. We did the first one of these webinars back in January, looking at the 2012 data, and we've done the one today, looking at more 2013 data produced by Ovum, and also broadening the discussion into the implications for carriers and the wider enterprise mobility. Richard, I believe you've got some forthcoming research which focuses more on the enterprise mobility market.
Yeah, so realistically we're looking at publishing something around Q4, so we're just kind of actually publishing all of the data that I've been going through today. We'll be making available fairly shortly. But what we're planning to do later in the year is actually really provide a detailed report that we call a decision matrix on up to 15 of the different vendors, the software vendors in the space. So I think that might be interesting for carriers, obviously, in terms of identifying who the competitors are, but also the different potential partners and how they differentiate, what their different strengths and weaknesses are, what kind of functions they offer. So yeah, I mean, that's, as I said at the beginning, we've been doing this really for 2 years, and we published something around that the beginning of last year. We did a solutions guide to MDM. This year, we're really trying to broaden out and talk more about enterprise mobility management as a whole.
So I think that will probably be of real interest to many of the people on the call. If that focuses on either potential threats to the position, but also a threat is often also a partnership opportunity. Mm-hmm. So, and I know many carriers look for real strong research to help them make that decision as to whether they should partner with one or more vendor in each of these areas. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining the call today. As I said at the beginning, we will forward the slides on to everyone who attended. If there's any questions that we didn't manage to cover, we'll come back to you directly, and also feel free to send any questions through to us at Rockshore or Richard at Ovum. I believe our contact details were on the original invites. So thanks again for your time today, and hopefully we'll see you again at one of these events in the future.